good evening. I've got to learn to hold this thing up here. If you haven't read this, I hope you have while you've been sitting there. It tells you a little bit about the area, and we're sitting on a parcel that's right next to what was Benton Town. And Benton Town was the spear point of southwestward expansion in 1801. That's hard to think about when we think of the Southwest being out in Arizona, Nevada, places like that. But this was the farthest point in that expansion. And from here we have 4 men that lived almost in the area. 2 of them in the area, a couple that were in Middle Tennessee, Nashville. And those 4 people that took us from, after the Louisiana Purchase, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and they were very much expansionist. And that became known after it was complete as Manifest Destiny. So these 4 people, and that includes one of our people that we have here, Thomas Hart Benton. He was a senator out of Missouri. He had seen the growth. He came here as a youth. He got his acclamation here. He went over to St. Louis and he became one of the 2 first senators to serve from Missouri. He served 30 years. Another person you've probably heard of was Andrew Jackson, very much in expansion. The third one would be Sam Houston, when you think about how we got the southern states in over there, Texas mainly. And then the final one was James K. Polk, right over here. James K. Polk went to school at the same time Thomas Hart Benton was teaching. So very possible that they could have had at least 1 year of being together as student and pupil. So all of that to say that we gained all that property due to the first Southwest expansion coming here. And the first expansion was Benton Town. Guess who it was named after? Okay, Thomas Hart Benton. One thing to understand is that when we got the land from England, going from the Appalachians all the way to the Mississippi River, we as a nation had no idea what we had gotten, because we hadn't been allowed to come over the Appalachians because it was part of a treaty that said with George III and the French and Indian War ended. Well, the Indians didn't end it. They still wanted to fight. So his agreement was, stay on that side, we'll stay on that side of the mountains. Anybody over here's got to go back. And that kept peace. This is where we got the land for Tennessee. And Tennessee at this point was not even a state. And the blue means it was already, by treaty, part of our country. The Treaty of 1785 moved us from the Cumberland River out to the ridge, the Tennessee Ridge that goes around us. That ridge, if you're going west, which is where everybody was going, is the one that runs under 840 over here. Okay? So that's how close, and we were right here. And you know how close we are to that ridge, and we were actually down where the market is, the Shell Station, Leiper's Fork Market. That was kind of the center of a land grant. That land grant was payment for the services of a guy named Jesse Steed. He was a lieutenant in the Revolutionary War. After the war, we had no money, especially North Carolina. So North Carolina paid its troops in land. As a lieutenant, every lieutenant got 2,560 acres. That's 4 square miles. And so the center of it is down there. There are markers to show where the first Benton house was, etc. But we were right there, and from their front porch, they could see the Chickasaw Nation in 1801. That property was acquired by acquiring one of those land grants. And a lot of the people that got the land grants didn't want to come over the mountains. They were happy where they were. It wasn't going to be a lot of money, but in the location they were in, there would be land speculators that would be buying their land grants at roughly pennies on the dollar in modern day. So in this you'll see Leiper Springs, Leiper Creek, Leiper Fork. You'll see a lot of references to Leiper. So that's where it was located. Orange County, a lot of things happened in Orange County, and that's in North Carolina. It's near Durham. Recording of land grants were done there. So if you're a land speculator, that's where you wanted to be. If you're already there, you wanted to be a land speculator. It was the home of Nancy Gooch Benton. Her husband died after he got this land grant. He bought it on speculation, and he died in 1790. By route of the day, that was approximately 600 miles from where we're standing. So if you can imagine a widow with 8 children, the oldest boy being 18, and 6 enslaved persons coming 600 miles, not on an interstate, on narrow paths. That created the Pioneers' Creed. It was already out there, and the creed is, cowards never started, the weak died on the way, only the strong survived. Very, very true. In 1800, Congress began to realize how much property was over here. Tennessee had become a state in 1796. They were having problems with uprisings over on the river, so they needed a route to Natchez. And so they made what was going to become the Natchez Trace an official postal route, but they put no money into it. It was just a title. The Bentons came here, and this is their first cabin. It was built in 1801. Believe it or not, it's still here. Something we're very fortunate to have. As they stayed here, right off the bat, she started sending word back to Orange County for friends, neighbors, relatives, where she came from, to come here. And if they would come here, well, that's the second house they built, and it was built in, it's really 2 log cabins connected by a dog trot, and it's been clapped over in the years. And before I get off of it, there's a basement under here with windows. The basement they did, the history mystique is that they did that to protect themselves from the Indians. And so when the Indians attacked, they could fight back through the windows and be protected by the ground being in the basement. Great myth. The Indians didn't come. The Chickasaw were at peace with us. We had a treaty. They did not come over the mountain, over the ridge. And that was actually the kitchen and dining area. And it was dug down into the ground for cool in the summer and warmth in the winter. We find a lot of that as we go through the history when you follow the folklore and what really happened. So she sends word up. Her family, this gives you the age they were when they came on that 600-mile trip. Youngest, 12. The mother was 43. Her oldest son was 19. That was Thomas Hart Benton. With her came 6 enslaved persons. It's assumed there were 2, best guess, 2 females and 4 males. The grave of the 3 sisters was on Benton Heights, and that's on this edge of that land grant. And it's at the highest point as you're going down to the market. You look to the right, and it was up there. You can see where it was. There's a big flat spot. It had stones around it that were 4 to 5 feet high to protect the bodies, etc., and formalize the graveyard. Those stones were later, way later, used for foundations and chimneys in the building of some of the houses here. The father died of tuberculosis. Back then it was called consumption. He had a long and agonizing death over 3 to 6 month period. During that time, Nancy Gooch turned gray-headed at 43. Well, it was before 43. She's 33 when that happened. At 8 years old, Thomas Hart Benton was brought in, and he had seen his father suffer from this greatly, and he was told, "You're the man of the house now." So imagine an 8-year-old today being the man of the house. The 3 sisters, again, they only lasted, the longest one, 9 years here. The enslaved person who carried the 3rd sister up to the 3 sisters' graves was an enslaved person called Uncle Joe. 2 weeks after he carried her up, they carried him up. Consumption. Consumption killed 1 out of every 4. Every 4 deaths, one of them was consumption. And if you were a female, you had very little chance because the consumption didn't get you, childbirth did. And it's not unusual to see husbands, men, who had 5 wives, 3 wives, 2 wives. And then Thomas Hart Benton came down with all the symptoms of tuberculosis, of consumption. He had seen his father, his 3 sisters all die of it, and it was agonizing. He did not want to go through that agony. He wanted to die in battle rather than waste away in bed. And that's the reason he joined Jackson's militia. That's a young version, and of course, the old senator. And again, he served 30 years, and at that time, he was the longest serving senator in the history of the U.S. Theodore Roosevelt wrote a biography about him. He was so impressed with him. John F. Kennedy included him in the Portraits of Courage, the 10 senators that made the most difference in the United States to that date. So he was quite well known. If you look up Thomas Hart Benton and just Google him, you're going to get this guy. He was a muralist. Senators don't count. It's the guys with the art. That's what happens out here in Leiper's Fork now. The painting, have any of you seen that painting? If you've been to the Country Music Hall of Fame, you have seen it. That was the last mural that he did. Before I forget, Thomas Hart Benton's protege, his oldest daughter, was Jessie. This guy's named Thomas Hart Benton. Guess what he named his oldest girl, his first girl? Jessie. He is the great nephew of Thomas Hart Benton, the senator. This is his last mural that he ever did. He did it for a person that begged him to, and it's called The Sources of Country Music, and it was Tex Ritter that asked him to do this. He did it, and his studio in Missouri was just outside of his house. He left the house to go down. He told his wife, "I'm finished, I'm happy with it, I've made all the adjustments that I needed to, I'm going to go down and sign it." He didn't come back to the house. She got worried. She went down there. He was laying on the floor with a paintbrush in his hand to sign it with, dead. It's the only mural he ever produced that he didn't sign. In it, you can see all the different types, the sources of music. That's supposed to be Tex Ritter, the guy he did it for. We got a federal garrison here. It was here in 1801. It came in September. The garrison myth. The garrison was sent here to protect the settlers that were coming in from the Chickasaws, because you could see the Chickasaw Nation border from Benton's house. And everybody went with that. Well, we got the orders that Colonel Butler got on his trip here. And it goes every step, every order he issued. Guess what he came here for? To keep the whites from going over into the Chickasaw Nation and breaking the treaty. Just the opposite. So that was his purpose in coming, but what he actually did very shortly thereafter, just a few months, they realized, no, the Chickasaw aren't a threat, and they weren't here for that anyway. They were here to keep the white folks from going over. And his new order was to survey and start cutting the Natchez Trace, because they needed a road that they could get to Natchez from Nashville easily. By 1809, that was complete, and you could actually drive in a carriage from Nashville to Natchez in only 20 days. We're talking about months prior to that. Bentontown. By 1803, people had come to Bentontown. They got 100 acres for 7 years, lease or rent free. If you're coming across the mountains, that's a huge amount of ground. On the other side, 100 acres was big. Over here, 100 acres was small. So she gave it to those people that would come, and they came. Had many springs and fertile land, a big point for them. It was located on the Natchez Trace, And so they had a lot of traffic. At this time, the Trace was really getting a lot of traffic because Natchez was the stopping point for the flatboats coming down the Ohio. And they would come all the way from Pittsburgh down the Ohio and then down the Mississippi till they got to Natchez. Then they'd sell the lumber of the flatboats for building down there and get some money there, but they'd also sell whatever they took down there. And it was everything from bourbon to nails to whatever. Then they'd walk back up the Natchez Trace. By 1818, I've probably got a slide coming up on it, but by 1818 there were 3,000 boatmen a month walking up the Trace, coming back mainly into Kentucky, but also Ohio and anything that bordered the Ohio River. So, the Bentons, as we know, stayed here until 1815, and Thomas Hart Benton went to St. Louis. A year later, his mother joined him up there. One of his brothers went to West Tennessee. Another brother actually went all the way to Texas. So the Bentons left, in essence. So the group's looking around and saying, well, what are we going to call ourselves if we're not going to be Bentontown? There are no Bentons here any longer. Well, in Orange County, there was a town, I haven't mentioned it yet just for this, and it was Hillsborough. Hillsborough. So they said, well, we're all from Hillsborough, most of us, so we'll call ourselves Hillsborough. And that's what they agreed on. So that's when Bentontown dropped and Hillsborough became the name of the community. In 1818, they said, well, we've got these 3,000 people coming up with their pockets full of gold. The area is growing around us. So we need a post office. And since it had been declared a postal route earlier and they did have this much traffic, the United States Postal said, sure, you deserve one. What do you want to call it? And they said, Hillsborough. And the post office said, there's already one here. It's over toward Manchester, it's over east of you, but you can't have two in the same state. Well, they looked around and they agreed, well, we're on the Leiper's Fork Creek, so we'll be Leiper's Fork. And that's how Leiper's Fork became the post office name here. And you have to separate Hillsborough from the post office name. Because most people think, well, it's always been Leiper's Fork to a degree, because that's what you know it as. It was Hillsborough. It was only post office name. So, big enough crowd gets here, a family donates enough for a church. The first church here was built in 1821, and it was the Union Church, because you didn't have enough people to have the different church for each denomination. So each congregation got 1 week, a month. So it was the Methodists, the Baptists, the Presbyterians, and the Christians, which became the Church of Christ. They got one a month. And I asked, well, what did they do the rest of the time? They held them at homes for the congregation. So the first congregation to move out, we'll talk about in a little while, but it was the Methodists. They moved out and got their own church before anybody else. We were a destination out here. Hillsborough was advertised. 1833, James Wilkins, who bought the Benton place, so you know where that would be down there at the market. There are markers down there. So he bought it and he put public notice out that he had accommodations for 15 to 20 boarders coming out here for the springs and the health of the water. In 1852, another magazine or literature containing an ad inviting guests to Benton Springs with a pricing list, including that it was a delightful, healthy, and agreeable neighborhood. Political speaking and political rallies was very popular during that time, unlike now. So, again, in 1825, Puget Springs opens on Fernvale Road. Anybody know where Fernvale Road is? It's right out there. So, out there was a great spring, Puget Springs, And it reported there were over 500 people at Hewitt Springs on Sunday evening, and it complimented the food that was available and the health benefits of the spring. So we became a destination. So much so, we'll talk about it in a minute, but started building roads to Nashville. Now that we're talking about it, that's a toll road booth. They started the toll roads in 1848. And that was a toll house where you had to pay, and they'd raise the gate, and then you could go on. The Civil War interrupted that construction some, but you're familiar with Hillsboro in Nashville. When you're coming out of Nashville, there's a community called Hillsboro. It's called Hillsboro because when you're coming this way, it was on Hillsboro Road, so they adopted the name. This is a local picture, obviously. That picture was taken in 1881. One of the things I'd like you to do is remember this little guy right here. We're going to talk about him a little bit. If you look at the family, this is the Lunn and Locke family. How many big boys do you see in that one? You think they just had all girls? I looked up one of his brothers in this picture in the 1880 census. He was 13 years old, and he was listed as a farm laborer. So you were considered a grown contributor once you got to where you could wear a big pair of boots. This house, we're going to talk about it, and I'm going to try to tell you the story of Hillsboro through some people, so you can identify with what they were going through and what Hillsboro was doing. And this is Hillsboro. That house was built in 1887. It was the first, to my knowledge, Victorian-style house that was built in this area. So, that house was built by her father, her husband, etc. They lived in that house, built it for them. That little girl was born in that house. We'll use her first name, Laura. I want to show you how Laura did in Hillsboro. This is her again. Now she's got a little brother. You can see the father in it now. And of course she's got 3 older siblings. So would you say they're doing pretty good for the time? Exceptionally well. Next, he had built this house for someone. He liked it. He had a buyer for his house to a doctor. So he bought the house that he had built down here and had a store next to it. I'm going to stop and point out something about the store because stores were very important. At most times there would be 7 to 8 stores in this area. And sometimes they were right next to each other. I never quite understood the marketing on that. But here she is. She's getting a little older. They've got all this. I love the horse and buggy. So, that's the inside of that store. It's the only that old of a picture that I know of one of the stores. And I want to point out this rope goes over. That's a light fixture. No electricity. So they had to let the light down to light it and then pull it back up and tie it off to light the store. So here she is a little bit older, still in that same house. Little brother's growing up. He's retiring because he's aged out. He's going to start running the store instead of building houses. And I like to point out the sunflower. The ground was fertile. I've never seen a sunflower that big. Well, a few miles away, there's a guy named Alex. And in one of the books I've read that somebody did, that says Alex in his courting days. Well, Alex, and we actually had the postcards, they communicated by postcards even though they were about 6 miles away. He'd send a postcard and say, hey, I'd like to come see you Sunday. Can I come over? And one of them he signed, your bad boy, Alex. He does look like he has an attitude. They got married. His father had died at a young age, early. And they had a farm and everything, but they didn't do real well, and there were a lot of kids to be split among. He became a sharecropper. A sharecropper is low on the income list or society. This is one of their children. They had 6 children. He's in South Hall, at the South Hall one-room school, because that's where his father was sharecropping out there. So he grows up there. Next thing we have of him, he's in Garrison. Because if you're a good sharecropper, people would get you over somebody else. And he happened to be known as honest, and he was a good farmer. So he did well. Laura, 2 of her older siblings, actually went to a high school, a private high school that you had to pay to go to, that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Education was extremely important to her. And she had gotten a high school education, which was unusual. So there he is in, that would be about 34. In 37, he graduated from Hillsboro High School. It was over here at the time. He could have done no worse than being 12th in his class, because you take away the 3 teachers and there's only 12 seniors. I think he could brag about that. This is to let you know, number one, Alex built himself up out of being a sharecropper. He bought a farm, and so they were on their way to prosperity. But the big thing, I didn't put it up there for him so much as every article that you read in the paper forever, practically, is Hillsboro. Some people want to think that, oh yeah, it's always been Leiper's Fort. When it was first started to change the name, rebranding, the old people didn't like that at all. We're Hillsboro. But you can see here, let's see, he was a prominent farmer. Over here, he and another guy were the treasurers for the building of the gym. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's one-room school. You had to have tough feet. And that's not real way back. Some of them go way back. There were 11 one-room schools around this area. One, of course, here in Hillsboro, one down in Bingham, one over in South Hall, one over, they were all over the place. They were set up where a child would not have to walk more than 2.5 miles to get to school. So they were roughly 5 miles apart. And they didn't have phones to read while they were going. This is, now remember there are 11 schools around. This is the one African American school and church. It was built in 1871. The Hillsboro school, one-room school, wasn't built until 1873. But there was one prior to it down in where Bentontown was. This is the only picture we know of the school class there. There's a story that a person shared with us, and they were walking to Bingham to go to school. They met a little girl walking this way to go to school every day. She happened to be a minority, a black, and she was having to walk all that distance to get her education. So a lot of people paid a big price to get an 8th grade education. In 1890, we're getting into the boom time. Life was good. A lot of building going on. Remember the house that I showed you that was built in 1887. In 1830, a gentleman who had done this before at other places opened a school, a 12th grade school, unheard of outside of Franklin. It was a private school. For a 5-month semester, you paid $20. People came as far as from Nashville. A lot of them out of Thompson Station, around, and then of course locals. Laura's older brother and older sister are listed in their catalog as being graduates from that school in 94, I think it was, 1894. So, this is a music room. Now, the guy that opened this up was William Anderson. And he was a total different animal. In his pamphlet he put out in 1894, and you'll see that there are girls in the class and women. He said in the pamphlet, other than physical strength, he found women, girls, to be equal to a man in anything else, as far as geography, math, history, that they were just as good intelligently, they just didn't have the physical strength of a man. That was very forward thinking for that time. So they paid $20 for a five-month course. Then they had room and board, and we'll talk about that. But I had a discussion with a person. Over here we have a big version of this hanging in the rec center. And I said, and that's the music room. Well, he happened to be Church of Christ, very Church of Christ, Mr. Anderson that started this. And this person happened to be very Church of Christ. And he said, oh no, you're wrong on that. And he said, there wouldn't be music, not allowed. And I pointed out that there were women in this, and that even though you're Church of Christ, when you had guests come over, the women were expected to play in the parlor, play the piano. And he went, huh. So, this was the girls' dormitory on the back and the house for the professor and the other people in here. But I want you to remember that little corner there, because that was the girls' dormitory. And it was isolated from downtown, if you want to call that downtown, for their protection. This was the boys' dormitory. You should recognize this. This is the spa on the corner down here. It was built in 1890. You don't see it, and it may not be there now as far as at that time, 1890 just being built. But if you get a chance to kind of weed through the bushes, there is a U.S. Geological Survey marker embedded in one of those yellow stones. So you know that you're 688 feet above sea level. That was important. So the dormitory was on the back side. There was a cyclone, which is really a tornado, that occurred in 1909, made all the papers. This is a house that was up where Naomi Judd, the late Naomi Judd's house was. It sat right where that house sat. This is what it looked like just a few days later. It settled down, came to the ground at Lick Creek, which is several miles away. It came up through Garrison, and Garrison was hit rougher than anybody else, probably, during that time. And it went all the way to Nolensville on the ground. Imagine the destruction. And there are many pictures of it showing the destruction. But that's them right after it went through. The children, one was hurt, one was found hanging on a telephone line. 2 horses were killed, 2 foals were without a mother. The stories that come from this are just innumerable on how bad it was. The big time. Now we're going from, things were great. Hillsboro was growing. People were coming to Hillsboro. The housing people were just going crazy, building houses. So that was a very high paying and good job. Then the railroad comes in. This is 1910. And guess what we had out here? Timber. Franklin was growing. Nashville was growing. Now, this gave away a potential of how to transport it, not only to Franklin, but then Franklin could change the cars to another train and it would go to Nashville. Boom time. This is the schedule. It went all the way to Mount Pleasant. So it was 28 miles, I believe, of railroad track. Now, this is kind of a thing you wonder about when I keep saying it was Hillsboro. Down in here, there it is Leiper's Fork in 1910. Look at the people that were over this. President and all these people. They were out of Nashville, Columbia, Nashville. Only one out of Franklin. So they looked at what's the official name, and they looked at the post office. So that's how Hillsboro was put on there as Leiper's Fork. Middle Tennessee Railway, that's when it was active. The South Hall brothers, put a sawmill right next to the depot. Smart thinking. That sawmill was the number one employer in Hillsboro from 1910 to 1949. Think of that. So the train ran from 1910 to 1927. And then they had cut all the timber. This was the sawmill on this side. That's the depot. There was a spur that came off there so you could park and load whatever you were going to send back to Franklin. The stones for that are still in place. This side over here is a shuttle factory and a factory to hone down, make the right size for making handles. Shuttle factory, to explain that. Shuttles were used in the textile industry to run back and forth carrying the thread, and they had to be made out of dogwood. And in the 1920 census, I like to go into the census, I found a guy, and you look over at his occupation, and he was manager of the shuttle mill. So this went for several years, and the occupations in the area, and kind of by hierarchy, were builders and carpenters, because they were building houses like crazy. Railroad, and that's meaning a conductor or somebody that works with the train that's moving. Why would railroad be so high? Look at the other things. Blacksmith, moonshiners. And this is kind of in order of how much money you made. Grocers and merchants. Grocers and merchants made their money by buying sugar and selling it to the moonshiners. Timber, sawmill, farmer, then you got tenant farmer, and then you've got sharecropper. So you were just one step above the formerly the enslaved person. And that's where Laura found herself when she first started out in her marriage. Railroad. A lot of these other people, it depended on the weather, especially the farmers. You weren't guaranteed that you were going to have a crop. Railroad guy got a check every Friday. So they were sought after. Small community, if a woman's going to pick out a husband, if he's got a railroad job, he's going to be very popular. Look at that log. That tells you why it was so important for the sawmill, and there were several sawmills, but the one that's set up next to the train was probably the most used, most profitable. It was three brothers, the South Hall brothers. Their three houses are still standing, and that's one of the great things about Hillsboro. Leiper's Fork still has the artifacts of those things. But look at that one log, and that's the kind of logs that were around here. They'd never been harvested. We got another family I want to spotlight. This is Joseph Latimer Sweeney and his family. He came out of Sweeney Holler. Always wondered why it had its name. There were no Sweeneys in it when I was there. He was one of 17 children. His grandfather had 14 children. It took his grandfather 5 women to get there to 14. His daddy got there with 1 woman. And that was amazing, to have 19 children, to grow up and still live through it. There was an old saying in Hillsboro at that time: you couldn't drive through or ride through Hillsboro and throw a rock and not hit a Sweeney. So, doing very well. That house is rebuilt. It burned in 1920, I believe it was. Am I close? 21. But anyway, there was a fire that burned 4 houses, but this house rebuilt is still sitting right over here on the corner of Joseph Street. He's in that top tier of incomes. He had a blacksmith shop. And so now, not only does he have the plows to fix for the farmers, the wagon wheels to fix for the wagons that were being used, but he's also got all the machinery to keep up for the railroad, for the sawmill. So he had a very good business. But he wasn't satisfied with that. In 1911 was a huge year for us. And in 1911, he was talked into, he owned a 24-acre farm. And the president of the bank came to him and said, we got a lot of people wanting to come out here because we're very prosperous right now. They're right in the boom of the timber and everything. He said, they've got no place to move, no place to come. Would you take your 24-acre farm and subdivide it right here in Hillsboro? So Joseph Street, Sycamore Street, Elm Street, and Dogleg Alley were all in that 24-acre farm. And they sold at auction after his family already got first choice in 1912. So these houses that you see over here, many of them are original to that time period. He also invented something. You can see his patent. That was number 72. So that was the 72nd wagon that was made on that patent. And it would fold out. Well, he put in a factory, one of the first. You can see the church in the background, so you know where it was. These are 3 of them that are in process. So he actually had a factory to make this, and his oldest son went out and traveled all around selling them. They were very popular because prior to that, you had to have one wagon for each different thing. If you wanted to carry hay, you had to have a certain wagon. If you wanted to carry corn, you had to have a certain wagon. If you wanted to carry pigs, you had to have a certain wagon. This way, it would fold out. It would accommodate all that with one wagon. So it was very popular. It burned, the house that they lived in. That's the house that was rebuilt on the same foundation by his son Charlie, who lived behind him. And let me go back to this. See that pyramid house? That's the mark of the different type house. It went from Victorian, Queen Victoria had died. The guys that were building those houses had aged out. So this was the new house that was being built. And you'll see them all through the community. They'll have different numbers of dormers. Some will have 1, some will have 4, but that was the new style of house. It was cheaper to build, it got you more square feet, and so it was something you could put up a lot quicker. Somebody in here belongs to that house. There you go. Just found out it was built in 1914. This was the rebuild, and that's his wife. He had already passed away. He passed away in 1920. He was quite a carpenter and things like that. He built 2 coffins out of walnut. He was buried in one when he died. He built them in 1918, and he was buried in 1920. His wife was buried in the second one in 1934. This is somewhere around here. Built in 1911. Remember the little guy I talked to you about and said, remember him? And it was a real bad house on the hill, just a little fella, and all of his big brothers were out in the field. Church of Christ and the Methodist Church members were kind of in competition. So we have records show that he was baptized in the Church of Christ. 2 years later, he married a woman that was in the church here. All of a sudden, he shows up in other things as being one of the original 5 or 6 people that started this church. So he went from the Church of Christ, which all his family was Church of Christ, except his brother, which joined him in this. So he probably got left out of a lot of family meetings because of that. But this church was built in 1911 and remains a wonderful artifact. And if you haven't been in it, it's a joy to go in and see it. And notice there's where you tie your horses up to go. We built a bank in 1911. You see that it's got 3 indentions here and 2 windows. It's still driving horses, but also you see telephone poles. That tells us the picture was made after 1913, because by 1913 we had a telephone company out here. That's how prosperous it was getting. I think the bank's number on it, I've got one of their brochures where they're trying to get people to put money in, and I think the phone number was like 27. In this one, you can see it's expanded. There's the 3 for the bank, and there's another one, same size over here. At one time, we know that was a coffin factory. I love this one. Remember the little brother of Laura that was on the tricycle and sitting back there in the first pictures? He married that woman. You know what the VW stands for, Volkswagen? Vote women. She was a rebel rouser. She was also a Methodist. So, this tells you that lumber, and you can see all the saws, the axes, everything indicating lumber. And this was about 1918, I believe. And they'd been over to Franklin for a parade. And so they got together when they got back here and had their picture made. Well, this school over here, the real nice one, it went out of business in 1904. 1905, it became a public school. So everybody around this area got to get a 12th grade education, which was extremely rare. And I can tell you that Laura was very much on education, so she made sure all 6 of her children graduated from high school. That was one of the crowning accomplishments she felt that she had made in her life. It burned after being a public school for that period of time, it burned in 1930. This was the follow-up school that was built. This is the school bus. That's Henry. That's Margaret. I love seeing the chickens in there. This is it with the gym. So we're sitting between 2 great artifacts. Over here you've got a 1911 wonderful church. That gym over there is the one that was built and is in this picture, and it remains there from 1939. By the way, that school that you had to pay to go to, we're standing on it. So this area right here has seen a lot of change and a lot of activity. They got rich. They got a bus in 1941 instead of that flatbed truck. The gym became the gathering point for the community. They built it in 1939. The boys' team out here won the county tournament in 1939. So all of a sudden it's a magnet. In 1949 they had to build balconies on both sides because so many people were coming. And even with the balconies, the people were having to sit on the floor. The bleachers weren't enough, and you can see them here under the goal. When the ball went out of bounds, they had to ask the audience, the fans, to scoot over so the guy could step out of bounds and throw the ball in. This house, going back to memory again, remember the girls' dormitory that was on the back of the house in the earlier ones? This is that back of the house, and you can see how it looks like a dormitory. It'd be 12 rooms. Was put on log rollers and pulled by oxen down to the main street down here and put in position. And that's it, put in position. And you can see again sidewalks, which was odd for an area like this. The next one, you'll recognize which house that is down here. Got the big 4 columns on the front. At this point, those columns, I think it was 1949, there was a fire over in Franklin. And those columns were on a big house over there. When it burned, they fell forward. And a guy went over and bought them and brought them out here and put them on that dormitory room. And that house still stands down there, as many of them do. That's the oldest house that we know of in Hillsboro. And that one dates back to 1851 to 1853, along in there. And you can see it as you're going down to the right out here. It's sitting, and you can see some of the siding's been pulled off of it, and the original logs from when it was first built are on it, or in it. Moonshine, moneymaker. Tennessee was the first state to have a prohibition law against alcohol, and they had it in 1838. So we had a lot of practice on moonshining. When it got even worse and the pressure was on to abolish the allowing alcohol at all, Tennessee had already done it in 1909. So when it came around 1920, it was old news here. And it wasn't an impediment because the moonshiners had been making it for years and years and years. We had the ground. We had a great place to grow corn. A bushel of corn would bring maybe 10 cents, 5 cents. You can take that bushel of corn and turn it into alcohol, and it'll bring 75 cents. Guess what? These are rare photos because moonshiners didn't like their picture taken with the moonshine. That was kind of like an admission. I like this one because you got 3 guys and 2 mules. I'll let you figure that one out. Remember the little boy that sat on the street going up here, little guy, and his brothers were out in the field working? He's also the guy that was Church of Christ and became a Methodist. That's him. 1925. He became a revenuer. He got in the pockets of the bootleggers. He busted 72 steals in 3 months. Bootleggers couldn't take it, Franklin bootleggers. They had him assassinated. That's the last picture known of him right before the assassination. It was on a Saturday night, March the 7th. They sent 2 men out. They watched him during the day, knew where he was. After he got out through with Franklin on that night, they went ahead of him, got behind his fence, and when he got out of the car to open the fence, double-barrel shotgun to the chest and the neck. So, that guy is Sam Locke. He has the biggest tombstone in the cemetery down here. I won't get into it because we may do a story on him someday, but it includes stories about the Ku Klux Klan and things you wouldn't even think about. Okay, Prohibition ends. Thank goodness. Why did it end? Anybody know? If you do, don't tell me so I can say it and you'll be surprised. Okay, 1933, Depression. Since 20, they hadn't been allowed to have distilleries and things. In Reading, Pennsylvania alone, 2,100 people lost their jobs due to Prohibition. Happened nationwide. It was impossible to enforce, but the big thing was they needed to get people back to work. Roosevelt needed people with jobs. Also, he needed income for tax. That's why Prohibition went away. It was economics. So here we have, looking down the street, you remember the music room that was at the private school here on this property? They rolled it down there and it became a doctor's office right there. You didn't let anything go to waste. You still got the tie-ups for the horses. The bank is still a bank at this time. Now the bank has turned into a store. And you can see down through the village, we've got cars, we got gravel roads. If you've got gravel roads, you don't have bridges. That is a walkway, a swinging bridge that took you from behind the Country Boy, which wasn't there at the time, over to the other side of the creek. So the people that lived over there, even when it flooded, would have a way to get in here to get groceries and stuff. I bet kids loved that. This was the Oddfellows Lodge, Fernville Oddfellows. Right now you can see that they had already left. It's being lived in up there. Store down here. You can see that that was the Lehue at that time, Lehue. That's another store right next to it. That's just an example of the type house, pyramid house that was built during that time. He was a railroad guy. He got a regular salary, so he was very popular. And if you're going back out this way or you come by that way, that's the house that is being rebuilt by Jimmy John right now. Herman Green Store. another one of the small stores in the area. He was running it starting in 1929, and that's him and his daughter, and together they ran it up into the 70s. One of the big things, hogs. We're now in a poor time. The wood is all gone. The railroad was pulled up in 1927. So hogs were easy to raise and they were a good money crop. Tobacco also was a money crop. Those are the two big crops that you used around here to make money. There are records that we have from Puckett's in 62, 3, and 4. And there was a man that had an account and he ran it for a full year. So he had to be really trustworthy. He paid off the major part of it in November and then the second part of it in January. Tobacco, November, hogs, January. Music has always been a big part. 4 of the Sweeney sisters actually were singers, and they sang with Uncle Dave Macon and also in the Grand Ole Opry. The reason I've got that one up there, you won't recognize that guy, but he came here from Los Angeles because he'd given up on being a music star, and he loved it. He came out here to get inspiration. Boy, I'm hearing myself. To get inspiration. So he lived out here in the country and in the poor area. And his name is Leonard Cohen. From being out here, he got re-inspired. He wrote Hallelujah. He became famous, and he's now, or posthumous, I'm pretty sure he's gone, but he made it into the Canadian Hall of Fame. This is not a prop or made-up type thing. It's not staged. This is Dr. Harry Guffey. He delivered, by horse, going out to these people, these children. This isn't just a one-off. He was willing to go out and bring aid to the people that needed it. You can see this is where they lived. Look at the rough boards, just off of a lumber mill. You can see a window back there. Doesn't have glass in it or anything, but you can see all the way through the house. This picture is 1948 to 1950 along in there. You can see that gym that we're sitting right next to. Here's the Methodist Church. There's the Church of Christ. And stores, houses, and a lot of these houses are still here. That's that development, if you want to call it the subdivision, where it was Joseph Street, Sycamore, Elm, and then Dogleg Alley up in here. Look at all the open ground. One thing I want to point out, this school, this is the only picture I know of that has this little group of rooms out there. That was 1st through 4th grade. The upper classes were over here in the one we saw earlier, and you can see the kids older over here playing softball. And again, here's the church. The younger kids out of this group of rooms back here, which were heated with pot-bellied stoves, all wooden, these lines go out while you're at recess. This is the boys' bathroom, and this is the girls' bathroom. And all it was red boards making a little hut with a ditch dug in it. Right there. If you had to do number 2, that was the first unisex bathroom in Hillsboro. So we fast forward, now we're looking at 1969. We've got the Country Boy built, we've got the Puckett's Grocery, we've got a antique shop here, or going to be an antique shop. It's a store right now. There's the church, there's the church. So it gives you a feel for what's going on at that time. This was a garage, and later it was a roofing company. And when the garage couldn't fix a car, they pushed it out the back. When they had a roof and they'd taken shingles or tin off and everything and had to get rid of it, they threw it out the back. So that was kind of the dump. Over here you had a laundromat that eventually the top fell in on it and stuff. What else? Then we go to when did we become Leiper's Fork? Leiper's Fork started with really two people, a husband and wife, and the lady, and I think it was 1984, put in the first commercial building and called it Leiper's Fork Antiques. She and her husband bought 3 lots, 3 things up and down that strip, and they had a vision of rebranding Hillsboro, which was the poorest area in the county. Where do you put your dump? You put it in the poorest area of the county. Things had gotten bad here. There were a lot of the old houses. You couldn't sell them. Nobody wanted to buy them. But they were the old houses. They were going to go down. Another person came along and started talking together, and they called them the 3 criminals. I'm looking at the lady that did all this back there. Marty, raise your hand if you wouldn't mind. Come on. Not going to raise your hand. Okay. Marty and her husband Bruce started this. And you couldn't say, hey folks, it's going to be great. Come out to Hillsboro. So the rebranding started then. With another person, they had the idea and they started pushing. And they created Leiper's Fork. It started in 1984 with 2 people. And the third person, and they would sit on their porch, on her and her husband's porch, until 2 and 3 in the morning, planning how they were going to do this. They would put together calendars for the whole year of events, bringing people out here, music, carnivals, you name it. And all of a sudden people started coming. One of the big things they did was start a thing called Kids on Stage, and that was in the new school that was built out on Pinewood Road, and they had 3 goals. They were going to teach songwriters, singers, and the equipment operators, the soundboards. It became so good, it was in 5 states, and I believe it's 5 states. It's five schools for sure. And then they got the attention of the country music world and different things like that. And all of a sudden you get these people coming out to go to that school for that reason, and you get some of the big names coming out here. That was the first move in becoming kind of a center for the country music stars and things. So the transformation, Leiper's Fork Antiques first, all the way, took a while, but in 1998, Leiper's Fork placed on the National Register as a historic district. You went from being the worst place to be in the county to being a historic district. In 2012, it was recognized as the newest member of Main Street program, one of 23 in Tennessee. So you can see the progress. Most recently, 2022, Puckett's is renamed Fox and Lock in recognition of its original local builders and operators. So taking everything back to original names, original people from here. My last thing I need to tell you, I think most of you are going to know this guy. I hope so. If you don't, you're missing out on something. Everything that I'm doing here is built on this gentleman. He's the county historian, and he is one of the most knowledgeable people. He started gathering information in 1971 out here. And he's one of the most knowledgeable people that I can think of. These pictures, he has a collection for the county of over 25,000 pictures. He's written probably, I think, 34 to 36 books. The first one he wrote was in 1998, and it's Leiper's Fork and the surrounding communities. It sold out. Then he had to have it reprinted in 1998. It sold out. And he's been kind enough to allow it to be reprinted, no charge by him or anything. And these are available at cost somewhere down the line if you'd like to get one. I'm not trying to sell them. Let's see. I'm going to tell you one personal story, and then I know I've gone over my time. I've only had 4 people back there going, stop. I'll tell you how bad this place, what a bad name it had. I was raised out here, and that might have given it the bad name, but my mother took me over to Franklin to join the Boy Scouts. So we got over there, and they were having a jamboree to recruit Boy Scouts. She talked to the head guy, said, I'd like my son to come over here and join the Boy Scouts. You know what his answer was? I'm sorry, Miss Jones. Y'all are from Hillsboro. Him coming in here with all these city kids, he'd be like a fish out of water. She never forgave him. Never. So, that's what Hillsboro was like. That's how it became Leiper's Fork. And now, if we had seen a car come through here from California or New Mexico or Chicago, Illinois, we'd have all gone take pictures of it. Now it makes up about 25 to 30% of the traffic on weekends. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.